More than 100 years ago, in the most hostile ocean on Earth, 28 men found themselves trapped inside a frozen nightmare. Their ship was surrounded by endless ice, locked in place by millions of tons of frozen ocean. Days turned into weeks. Weeks became months. For 7 straight months, the ship never moved. Then one night, in the absolute silence of Antarctica, a deep and violent sound echoed from beneath the vessel. The ship suddenly leaned to one side, as if something enormous had pushed it from below. At that moment, none of them knew that their lives were about to change forever. Antarctica is not just cold, it is unforgiving. Winds can scream at over 100 kilometers per hour. Waves can rise higher than buildings, and the ocean is so cold that unprotected human skin can freeze in minutes. Even today, with modern technology, traveling through these waters is extremely dangerous. But in the early 1900s, when navigation tools were basic and ships were far less advanced, entering the Antarctic Ocean was almost the same as volunteering for death. Yet in 1914, one man was willing to take that risk. His name was Sir Ernest Shackleton, a British explorer driven by a single obsession: to push the human body and mind to their absolute limits. Shackleton didn't want fame for reaching a destination. He wanted to prove that humans could endure the harshest conditions on Earth. That belief inspired the name of his ship Endurance. This journey was called the Imperial Transantarctic Expedition, and its goal was bold beyond imagination: to cross the entire Antarctic continent on foot, something no one had ever done before. But before the journey could even begin, Shackleton faced his first major challenge: finding people brave or desperate enough to join him. He placed an advertisement in a newspaper. It did not promise adventure or glory. Instead, it warned of low pay, extreme cold, long months of darkness, constant danger, and a very real chance of never returning home. There was no guarantee of survival. Surprisingly, the response was overwhelming. Shackleton carefully selected 27 men who were physically strong, mentally tough, and capable of working together under extreme stress. As the world moved closer to war, many believed the expedition would be cancelled. World War I had begun, and Britain itself was preparing for conflict. But permission was granted, and Shackleton was allowed to proceed. The ship chosen for the journey was unlike ordinary vessels. Originally built for Arctic conditions, it had a reinforced wooden hull designed to survive crushing ice. Shackleton purchased it, renamed it Endurance, and prepared it for one of the most dangerous voyages in history. On August 8, 1914, Endurance left England. For months, the journey continued across open ocean. The ship stopped in South America and later at South Georgia Island, where final preparations were made. On December 5, 1914, Endurance turned south toward the Weddell Sea, one of the coldest and most ice-filled regions of the Antarctic Ocean. On board were 20 men and dozens of sled dogs, meant to help transport supplies across the ice. For more than 40 days, the ship pushed through freezing waters. They were close just 1 day away from reaching the Antarctic coast when disaster struck. On January 18, 1915, thick sea ice began closing in around the ship. Layer by layer, the ice grew stronger and denser until it reached nearly 18 feet thick in some areas. The Endurance could no longer move forward. The crew tried to cut paths through the ice and even attempted to manually pull the ship free, but the effort was hopeless. After weeks of exhausting labor, the ship had moved less than a few hundred meters. By February, Shackleton made a difficult decision. Instead of fighting the ice, he ordered the crew to wait and allow natural ice movement to carry the ship. The Endurance became a frozen winter station, locked in place under the Antarctic sky. Life aboard the trapped ship continued with strict discipline. Shackleton understood that mental health was just as important as physical survival. The men followed routines, played games, held discussions, cooked meals, and kept themselves busy. They cut each other's hair, cared for the dogs, and tried to maintain a sense of normal life. Hope remained that the ice would eventually release the ship, but Antarctica had other plans. Massive sheets of ice pressed against each other, building unimaginable pressure. By mid-1915, that pressure was transferred directly onto the Endurance. Loud cracks echoed through the hull as the ship began to strain against the force. Then came the night. Everything changed. In July 1915, a violent noise erupted beneath the ship. followed by a sudden tilt. No one could explain what had caused it. Some wondered if it was ice movement. Others whispered about something striking the hull. By morning, the damage was clear. The ship's steering system had been destroyed, and the Endurance was no longer capable of navigating even if freed. By October, the pressure became unstoppable. Cracks appeared in the hull. Water began to leak inside. The crew worked non-stop, pumping water and reinforcing weak points. But the damage continued to spread. Shackleton knew the truth before anyone else admitted it. On October 27, 1915, he gave the order that shattered every heart on board. Abandon ship. Supplies, food, lifeboats, and essentials were dragged onto the ice. The Endurance, their home for nearly a year, was left behind. Slowly, under the crushing weight of the ice, the ship was destroyed and sank into the freezing ocean. Now the crew stood on floating ice, thousands of kilometers from any human settlement. Survival became their only mission. Shackleton decided they could not remain where they were. The ice beneath them was unstable, constantly breaking and drifting. He planned to move toward known land and island where abandoned shelters and supplies might still exist. The journey would be long and terrifying. For months, the men lived on drifting ice floes. They hunted seals and penguins for food, melting ice for water. Storms battered them. Temperatures dropped below -20 degrees Celsius, and frostbite became common. Some men could barely speak due to swelling and cold injuries. Eventually, the ice carried them toward Elephant Island, a barren and uninhabited piece of land. After 16 months of suffering, they finally touched solid ground again. But safety was an illusion. Elephant Island offered no rescue routes and no permanent food supply. Shackleton realized that waiting meant death. He made one final, desperate plan. Taking a small lifeboat and 5 companions, Shackleton set out on a nearly impossible journey over 1,300 kilometers of the world's most dangerous ocean to reach South Georgia Island, where help might exist. They had no modern navigation tools, no GPS and no radio. Only basic instruments, stars, and hope. For 16 days, they battled towering waves, freezing spray, and constant exhaustion. At times, survival depended on seconds. When they finally reached South Georgia Island, they landed on the wrong side, blocked by mountains over 4,000 feet high. Despite near-total exhaustion, Shackleton and 2 men crossed those mountains on foot, without maps or proper gear. After 36 continuous hours of climbing, they reached a whaling station. The workers barely recognized the broken, frozen men standing before them. Shackleton did not rest. After multiple failed attempts due to weather, he finally returned to Elephant Island on August 30th, 1916. Smoke rose in the distance, a signal fire. Every man he had left behind was alive. Not a single life was lost. The original mission had failed. Antarctica was never crossed, but Shackleton achieved something far greater. His leadership, resilience, and refusal to abandon his men turned disaster into legend. More than a century later, in 2022, the wreck of the Endurance was finally discovered deep beneath the Antarctic Ocean, remarkably preserved, as if time itself had frozen around it. The ship still rests there today, a silent reminder that survival is not about strength alone but endurance.